Many people during this time period thought that alcohol led to many problems, most of which affected the American families. Many of these people were religious conservatives, known as Dries, who called for an act of temperance against alcoholic beverages. The 18th Amendment was passed by Congress on December 18, 1917, which made it illegal to sell, transport, and to manufacture alcoholic beverages. The National Prohibition Act, known as the Volstead Act, which was passed on October 28, 1919, clarified the 18th Amendment. This act stated that an act to prohibit intoxicating beverages and to regulate the manufacture, production, use, and sale of high-proof spirits for other than beverage purposes, and to ensure an ample supply of alcohol and promote its use in scientific research and in the development of fuel, dye, and other lawful industries. There were many loopholes found in the National Prohibition Act. For example, alcohol could be used for medical use if the patient needed it for their treatment. The Women's Christian Temperance Union, WTCU for short, of Ohio started calling for the abomination as early as 1873. Later, in 1893, also in Ohio, the WTCU was joined by the Anti-Saloon League, ASL for short. This organization later expanded into a national organization who endorsed political candidates that were against saloons and drinking alcohol. Through speeches, advertisement, and public demonstration at saloons and bars, Prohibition activists attempted to convince people that eliminating alcohol from society would eliminate poverty and social vices such as immoral behavior and physical violence. The Women's Christian Temperance Union, WCTU, allied with Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Canden Stanton. It had lobbied for local laws restricting alcohol and created an anti-alcohol educational campaign that reached into nearly every schoolroom in the nation. Main goal of the Women's Temperance Union was to have a Prohibition Amendment added into the Constitution. The Anti-Saloon League, ruthless and cutthroat leader, was Wayne Wheeler.
By 1830, the average American over 15 years old consumed nearly 7 gallons of pure alcohol a year. This is one of the reasons that the temperance movements across the U.S. started to spring up.
As anti-German fever rose to a near frenzy with the American entry into the First World War, ASL, Anti-Saloon League, propaganda efficiently connected beer and brewers with German and treason in the public mind. This did not sit with the politicians so well. In 1917, the 18th Amendment went quickly through both houses of Congress.
Many abolitionists fighting to rid the country of slavery came to see alcohol as an equally great evil to be eradicated. The temperance movement, rooted in America's Protestant churches, first urged moderation, then encouraged drinkers to help each other to resist temptation, and ultimately demanded that local, state, and national government prohibit alcohol outright. Women played a strong role in the temperance movement, as alcohol was seen as a destructive force in families and marriages. Temperance movement swept across the U.S. Their goal was to push moderation after years of being unsuccessful. Temperance leaders then focused their goal on having complete prohibition of alcohol consumption. They blamed alcohol for many of society's wrongdoings. The crime rate and gang violence escalated very quickly when prohibition started. The temperance members also urged husbands to stop spending all of their income on alcohol. Instead, put that money towards their families. These men here are shown pouring alcohol into containers secretly. This is called bootlegging. It was a secret way of distributing alcohol without being caught by prohibition laws or the authority. The cases shown held liquor and alcohol that was taken and banned because of the prohibition. This depicts how easy it was to sneak around selling alcohol as a bootlegger.
This is a little political cartoon also expressing how powerful and successful bootleggers were, because here the bootlegger has more power than those in authority. shown as a bootlegger making and packing his own alcohol. Most bootleggers did it themselves because most found it to be much easier and more secretive. Sometimes, if they were not sneaky enough, they were caught and sent to jail housing. Obviously, people were not doing well with the prohibition and had strikes to get their alcohol privileges back. Sometimes in the bootlegging business, there were powerful authority figures who promoted the idea, and they had more power over other bootleggers. There were many ways to transport alcohol, but by boat was the most common. This man shown was one of the most famous gangsters in America. His name was Al Capone, more commonly known as Scarface Capone, which they nicknamed him because he received a scar on the side of his face. He never liked that name, though. The picture shown is a modern-day couple back in that era, only this man was in the mafia. This is a group picture of an American mafia. They dress nice and always did things in groups. Here is another picture of a mafia holding weapons. They broke the law secretly and did dangerous deeds. A lot of violence occurred, including shootings and murders done by mafias. Different mafias even created problems with each other and used to have feuds and fights as well, and which resulted in murder and shootings. Here is a picture of a mafia man held at gunpoint. Times were very dangerous indeed. Here's an interesting fact. In order to get around and hide weapons, members used to carry around instrument cases and hide weapons in them. People suspected nothing of them and just thought it was an instrument in its case. Just a reminder that Prohibition was passed, and it is what caused all of this to happen. The government played one of the biggest roles during the time of the Prohibition. They had to create laws for the Prohibition, they had to maintain the laws, but they had to try and make everyone happy. The government did everything in their power to force people to remain sober. The number of liquor and beer seized during the Prohibition was great. People would be caught with the liquor in their homes and even in public, and all liquor would be confiscated. Some were even arrested if they were caught with the beer multiple times. The offense would be breaking the 18th Amendment or the consumption of alcohol. The government even resorted to campaigning and advertising in order to spread the word about the new amendment they wanted to pass. The government used many different slogans, billboards, and posters to try and convince people to change their ways. Depicting a mother with her child was another way to show people that it was dangerous and no caring mother would drink alcohol. Doctors gave patient cards that allowed the patients to get alcohol for medicine purposes. Many patients paid doctors extra in order to get these cards. One of the main reasons for the card was a weak heart or a different heart deficiency. The Ku Klux Klan, or the KKK, had a part in the Prohibition also. They used fear as a warning and alcohol as an incentive to get people to talk. People created recipes for alcohol, but the government would try to get rid of them before they distributed too far. The government made a specific section of law enforcement to govern the drinking and detective to discover who was selling and making and buying the moonshine and alcohol. Prohibition made headlines in New York and many other states. There were many people that were excited about the passing, and there were many who rioted. Many women were depicted in portraits, magazines, newspapers, and other places so that men would be persuaded to stop drinking and get sober. The government began pouring out barrels of beer and wine in the streets and sewers. They would make sure no one would be able to drink it or even want it. Who wants to drink potty beer? Many people began protesting the Prohibition and even began to riot. They started parades and standing outside of major government buildings, offices, and police departments. Most people believed the government were trying to shelter adults as if they were children and could not make their own decisions. Moderate drinkers were angry because they did not get drunk. They just occasionally drank beer at dinner or at parties. They did not believe that they should be punished for other drunkards' mistakes. People would have parties and then riot. They would dress up and dress their cars and make banners and ride around town protesting. More posters from the government showing that drinking makes you even more depressed. Virginia was one of the first states to vote dry by Congress. Even though most national Congress members from almost every state voted that their state should be a dry state, the Congress member drank moonshine. There are records and journals of Congress members that would buy illegal alcohol and consume it. The Senate also consumed alcohol. They would host parties with wine and moonshine. Keep and enforce the prohibition? I don't think so. If our own government can't follow their own laws that they pass, then why should they try and enforce the laws on other people? So finally the prohibition ended because no one could follow the law. So by making the alcohol from the state, they could continue to tax it. Even Congress members who passed the law eventually broke the law. The prohibition was a big turning point in the history of America. The crime slowed down after the prohibition and the major mob bosses had been taken down or died. The dries were back to being allowed to have alcohol. The prohibition was a complete failure. The mafia, where the people had benefited from it the most, and the crime rates were higher than they were before the prohibition. Alcohol consumption was worse. Kids and adults of all ages were drinking alcohol. Many times people would die from alcohol poisoning. Thousands of people died because of the alcohol poisoning.